Thank you very much, Professor. The Director of Institute for Development Studies, University of Nairobi, Co-Director, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the public lecture. It is with great honor to be here today, not only for this public lecture, but to be in an institution that have served not only as a pioneering platform for millions across the continent, but have also helped in providing solutions to the challenges that Africa faces today and tomorrow. Coming together in 1965 to conceptualize this institution, maybe those at the time thought that it was relevant just at that moment. But today, as we move to implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, in the Institute of Development Studies, importance and relevance has never been so important. This is a very important moment. We are 4 weeks into the time that the world, on the 25th of September, adopted the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. As this happens, in 4 weeks' time, the world will gather in Paris under COP21 to foster an agreement to keep the world below dangerous climate change. As this happens, we are 15 years into the 21st century. And the continent of Africa is faced with a series of challenges, unprecedented in scale as well as complex, ranging from food insecurity, unemployment, especially with the youth, malnutrition, land degradation, and worst of all, climate change, which is going to define the contours of this continent more dramatically than any other in this century. But as we speak today, the changing climate means that we are not the same way as we were 30 years ago. Neither we are the same as we were 10 years ago. So the music has changed. According to the African Proverb that goes, when the music changes, so does the dance. The music has changed, and so the dance has got to change. It is therefore very, very imperative that we start looking at a paradigm shift that will not only build resilience of communities, but ensure that we can have resilient food systems that can create jobs and ensure inclusive economic growth for everyone in the continent. So to ensure Africa's development can be put in a trajectory that puts poverty on the run and prosperity into the cockpit. But as we speak today, in 2000, the economists tagged Africa as a hopeless continent. 10 years after, the same economist newspaper tagged Africa as Africa Rising. Of course, actions speak louder than words. Africa's numbers are actually louder. The economic growth in the continent have increased up to about 5.5% as of last year, doubling almost the numbers of 1990s. But as these have increased, it is the same continent that have got 65% of uncultivated arable land, 10% of internal renewable freshwaters, and at the same time, having an agro-value industry that is worth about 1 trillion by 2030. However, amidst these impressive postulations may show, Africa's reality is like two faces of a coin. On the one hand, you have GDP numbers increasing, and on the other hand, you have poverty levels that have hardly shifted. And if nothing is done, the continent of Africa today have 240 million people go to bed hungry. It is the same continent where about 200 million people are affected by malnutrition, and it's killing 50% of children below 5 years. At the same time, if nothing is done, in 15 years from today, most of the world poor will be living in the African continent. The youth, between the age 15 to 25, currently are 200 million today and projected to reach 400 million in less than 25 years from today, will be entering the labor market. But as we speak, 60% of them are unemployed. And as I said, almost 1 in every 2 Africans live in extreme poverty and below $1. As if that is not enough, the continent have a food import bill of $35 billion every year. and it's suffering post-harvest losses worth about 48 billion, which means if you juxtapose this with the 35 billion that is being used to import food and the amount that is being lost, then there's no need for the continent to import food anymore. The continent is growing the food. Ecological degradation. 31 million people could actually have benefited from the 6.6 million tons of grains that are lost due to ecological degradation. Whether it's deforestation, whether it's soil erosion that is costing the continent, that is not enough. And most of this on-farm production is resulting to deforestation. It's resulting to land degradation. It's resulting to land pollution. And at the same time, even the post-harvest losses that happen at the farm level are not taken care of. But what report after report have shown is that the agricultural sector is the only sector, I repeat, the agricultural sector is the only sector that if invested in could actually reduce poverty up to 4 times more than any other sector. The tourism sector wouldn't do that, the manufacturing sector wouldn't do that. And at the same time, agricultural root production up to about 10% has potential to reduce poverty by up to 7%. With all of these put together, a changing climate, an Africa rising that is not inclusive, and at the same time approaches that are being used today to produce food that are causing pollution, post-harvest losses, ecological degradation, and worst of all, deforestation. Last year, UNEP in collaboration with partners constituted what was called the Continental Task Force to look into which approaches, by working with nature and at the same time can help create employment, are vital for the continent. They worked with partners and came up with a report titled Towards a Comprehensive Strategic Framework to Upscale and Upscale Ecosystem-Based Adaptation for Food Security in Africa. And what this report shows is that working towards an approach that builds resilience of ecosystems and at the same time resilience of community towards climate change, as well as enhancing the productivity of ecosystem, could create jobs up to about 17 million. And this approach could also increase yields up to about 128%. It could create 17 million jobs, I've said. And as indicated earlier, the agricultural sector has potential to increase yield, to reduce poverty up to 4 times more than any other sector. What the report also shows was the low productivity and climate change challenges, as well as the underdeveloped value chains in the continent, that is actually causing the losing of up to about 48 billion, as well as creating jobs can actually be achieved through harnessing EBL food security. And across the continent, all these are happening, and the results also show that utilizing the ecological-based approaches is not only good for crop yields, but at the same time could increase climate change knowledge, increase household yields, and at the same time also increase revenue and put more money in the pockets of communities. And there are examples across the continent, whether it's the Zai in Burkina Faso, or the agroforestry that is being practiced in Malawi, and even in Kenya and across the continent. Reported yields have actually been shown not only through these approaches, but at the same time also helping to build the resilience of these communities, whether it's by physical or social resilience. But with all this happening, it is important to understand that upscaling these approaches will not happen organically. And even if it does, it will do so not across the entire continent. Therefore, operationalizing this, there needs to be reforms in policies and institutions to ensure that at least there could be budgetary allocation, especially in the agricultural sector and environmental sector, to upscale EBA. There should be increase in communication and outreach to educate those across the continent to understand the added value of what this approach could bring and how it could be able to address the challenges, whether it's climate change or food insecurity, ecological production, and also reinforce economic incentives to attract the private sector, whether it is creating new economic zones and giving incentives to the private sector to open up industries, or at the same time strengthening knowledge management and ensuring that indigenous knowledge is actually integrated. All this happening will increase yield. But what has been lacking in the African continent today is that the value chain cycle has not been optimized. Optimizing the value chain system is actually where the jobs will be created for the 200 million youth, or the 60% who are unemployed today. And this will involve not only processing or storage or marketing, but at the same time, even the energy mix that we use will matter. Will it be energy that add more emissions to the atmosphere? Or will it be utilizing water through approaches that are actually affecting the environment and causing deforestation? With all this, it takes me to my first proposition, which is to optimize the entire agro-value chain in the continent, build resilience to climate change, and create jobs. The first is, don't overlook women. Women produce 80% of the food that the continent depends on. At the same time, there are stereotypes that are preventing them to access inputs, to access services or capital from the bank, or even to have access to education. But as we speak today, research has shown that women spend 467 minutes of daily farming, as compared to 371 minutes for some countries. But at the same time, the World Bank report shows that if women worldwide have equal access to the input, they will be able to not only provide food to up to about 150 million people, but at the same time, leaving them out of this sector and underlooking them will be costing the continent a lot. So there are three things that need to be done on that first proposition: invest in women financing. As we speak today, there are grand blueprint development agendas that the continent have developed. There is Agenda 2063 of the African Union. There is the Sustainable Development Goals, but the African version called the Common African Position. In Agenda 2063, it is ingrained and clearly stated that 30% of financing should go to women, that there should be an affirmative action that will show that women can be empowered so that they can have input and have the resources and the financial opportunities to be able to spur this already existing sector that they're providing 80% of the food that we all eat. The second is de-risk the lending in agriculture. Today, most of the commercial banks don't lend to agriculture because it's a risky area. But approaches that are proven to be a risk averter, like EBA, could actually be utilized by the very same banks, supported by the government, working with the private sector, and ensuring that utilizing ecological-based approaches could be used as incentives and at the same time as a collateral to be able to give more loans to women so that they can be able to invest in the sector that could be able to create jobs. The third is, when you produce, that is not enough. Most of the women produce get lost. They don't have access to market. So there needs to be an affirmative action that clearly states policies which could be able to provide opportunities so that the women who are producing 80% of the food that Africa depends on today have access to market. This will be, for instance, a policy that directly targets women in government tenders for agribusiness and so on. And that takes me to my second proposition: improving market and population access to food through better roads. The continent of Africa today have almost about 70% of its population rural. And 70% of this population rural, only about less than 50% have access to adequate roads. What does this mean? In as much as they could be able to produce, they will never find a market. The food will get spoiled. The food will get wasted. They will not convert the food into monetary terms to be able to put more money in their pocket. But as this happens, the transport state in the continent is in a state that if nothing is done, This will be costing the continent a lot. As we speak today, transport costs in the continent represent between 30 to 50% of the total export value in the continent. And Africa currently produces staple food that is worth about 50 billion, but it could add 20 billion if the transport infrastructure was revamped. And all these put together, the inter-regional trade in the continent is the lowest on earth, compared to 65% in Europe, 45% in North America. And so as a result of all this, still under the infrastructure preposition, there are about 655 million people who are energy impoverished. And this is costing 10 million medium-sized enterprises because they lack access to electricity. They cannot be able to run their companies. And this costs the continent up to about 4% of the GDP. But this is a paradox. The continent of Africa today is the continent with the biggest energy potential. Whether it is solar, whether it's geothermal, whether it's renewable energy, which is unexploited. Hydropower in Africa is estimated at 1,855 and 52 terawatts. But the continent is not tapping into this. But what the continent actually needs yearly is just about 554, which means the potential of the hydroelectric potential in the continent is 3 times higher, which is not being tapped into. Only about 10% of that is utilized. Then solar. 0.3% of the sunlight that shines in the Sahara could light the entire Middle East and Europe. That means that could light the entire Africa and other places. But this is not being tapped into. Then there is geothermal. East Africa alone has an estimated geothermal potential of about 15,000 megawatts. And Kenya alone has a potential of about 10,000 megawatts. And currently it's producing 579 megawatts. So there is huge potential. And then there's wind. But the aspect of energy continent in the world, it is also the continent where you spend 38 days to import goods across countries and spend 32 days to export, the longest wait times in the world. This must change. And worst of all, Africa produces what it doesn't consume and consumes what it doesn't produce. That needs to change. If that doesn't change, then definitely the hidden potential, though the potential is there, it wouldn't mean much because potential alone can't create jobs. Potential alone can't feed the 240 million who go to bed hungry. And the fourth is reform air transport. In 1982, the then Organization of African Unity came together and adopted a declaration called the Yamoussoukro Declaration. And this declaration was ratified in 2002. But as we speak today, not up to 12 countries have implemented it across the continent. And what was this declaration about? Liberalizing Africa airspace means air travel across the continent will not be restricted. The high taxes incurred by airlines wouldn't be there. But as a result of sometimes national sovereignty, pride, which is good for all of us, poverty in sovereignty is not something good. But trying to integrate and bring the continent together is very, very important. I laugh most of the time when colleagues tell me that there are somewhere and Africa was mentioned like a country. I tell them, you need to be proud. Being looked as a country is good. That is part of integration, and that provides more welfare as compared to poverty in sovereignty. But the Africa Adaptation Gap report shows that in addition to agricultural reduction, The rising seas will not only disrupt trade routes or submerge infrastructure or disrupt the routes that connect farms to market, but it will also make routes impassable. But as a result of this, despite the fact that we have agricultural reduction, there will be some parts of the continent that will see yields increase up to about 13%. Which means that distribution across the continent, as a result of all the routes being disrupted, our airspace will definitely be the potential option. So implementing this declaration is crucially important. But most of the time, this has not featured in policy debates. ICT has featured in policy debate, trade policy has featured in policy debate, but I think it is time to look at air transport from the climate change perspective and also from an opportunity perspective, because Africa will need 93 billion to revamp its transport sector. But it will need 10 billion to revamp its air infrastructure. So it's even cheaper to do that. So a liberalized airspace will result in air traffic route which has wide-ranging benefits, trade between countries, movement of people from one place to another to learn techniques that could actually help them enhance agricultural productivity, to share ideas, and to be able to also foster partners with the private sector and others. Then the fifth proposition, mobile innovation. Sub-Saharan Africa is the region in the world that has seen not only subscription to mobile phone rise, but this has been, the increase in this has actually been astronomical. Just 7 years ago, from 90 million to 600 million, mobile innovation has actually infiltrated into the entire region, and it's not only helping provide access to markets, but this could be an opportunity that could be tapped to at the same time also finance and input utilized to be able to invest in agriculture. As we speak today in Kenya, the M-Pesa technology is an example, and at the same time, up to about 75% of the entire continent today have access to a mobile phone, and most of them don't even have access to a formal bank account, which means that utilizing their mobile phone, they can actually be able to spur the value chain in the agricultural value chain. For example, in Kenya, the M-Farm application, which was developed, is not only helping farmers collectively buy the inputs, but at the same time is linking them to markets. And this takes me to my sixth proposition, the youth, the hope of the continent. 60% of the continent today is youthful. And though it is useful, this presents an opportunity, but opportunities will only be useful if they are tapped. If they are not tapped, the discourse on whether the youth population is a dividend or a curse will continue. But I believe it is a dividend, because I believe that the opportunities are enormous. As we speak today, the youth between 15 to 25 are currently at 200 million. A couple of years, they will be at 350, and all of them will get into the labor market. Today in the continent, 10 million are getting into the labor market, and there are no jobs. So it signals that we need to start looking how we can start creating jobs in such a way that the jobs can be able to add more money into the pockets and also leave those at the bottom of the pyramid up. But the images on our television screens every day have become something else. The Mediterranean Sea has become like a graveyard for African youth. Every day we see images of what would appear to be a continent at war. and poverty, and people risking often, most of the time, losing their life in an attempt to look for greener pastures. But this must change. The opportunities are there. Tapping into the agro value chain could be able to generate jobs that could provide not only more money, but at the same time also ensure prosperity for the millions of youth who are today 60% unemployed. But this is not preordained. There are policies that must be put in place. There are things that the youth must do. There are things that the private sector must do. And there are things that everybody must do. Across the continent, there are youth who are already doing, in their own way, so many things. In Ethiopia, a young farmer is applying irrigation. And as a result of this, he's generating income and also creating businesses for others. In Nigeria, for example, an entrepreneur who started off by processing fruits into snacks and packaging them have expanded these across 2 states, and this has resulted in creating jobs for others. And this takes me to the 7th proposition. Africa's population is a market. The growing middle class in the continent is an untapped potential. Currently at 200 million today, this middle class is spending more. They are demanding more nutritious food, which means that optimizing the value chain is an opportunity that could create jobs, could generate new incomes, and at the same time also opportunities in the entire agro-value chain. Together with appropriate technologies, and at the same time utilizing ecological-based approaches will not only create jobs, but at the same time put more money into the economy of the continent if the trade barriers are removed, if the transport sector is reformed, if the airspace is liberalized. All these put together are opportunities to tap into. And then the 8th proposition, reform the educational sector. Africa needs an educational revolution. The classical style of primary, secondary, high school, university just won't do. The university system, the primary, secondary, high school system of today is good, but the realities of the continent must also dovetail to the solutions that are presented to us. It is therefore very imperative that the educational curriculum in schools be reformed to ensure that the vocational education also take precedence. The challenges like energy in the continent, food insecurity, the opportunities in creating vocational education. I'm going to give an example. Look at the infrastructure. The continent needs 93 billion to revamp infrastructure. That means there could be potential job creation. But how many vocational institutions are there to be able to train those who can be able to tap into that? The infrastructure in the continent today is being revamped, but we have the engineers to repair when those who revamp go back. So revamping the educational system and integrating the agro-value chain so that those at primary, secondary, and high school can start seeing the potential, can start seeing the market, and be part and parcel of what they can benefit. So that when we talk, as we're talking now, we will have those who will be telling the story, not us just telling the story, of them being part and parcel of this. The last proposition. The continent of Africa today doesn't lack ideas. It is neither a lack of innovation, neither is it lack of implementation plans, neither is it lack of good declaration from conferences, neither is it lack of excellent policy papers. But what is missing is lack of an implementation plan that can be able to bring everyone together and tap into the opportunities that the continent presents. As we speak today, we are about 60 days after the continent came together, 1,200. participants from all the countries. On the 28th, the 29th of July, and adopted a declaration which gave birth to what is called the Ecosystem-Based Adaptation for Food Security Assembly. This assembly provides a solution space to bring everyone together: civil societies, NGOs, private sector, academia, educators, students, researchers, and public sector, policymakers, to come together and bring their strengths to be able to tap the value within the agro-value chain, to optimize it, to build resilient climate change, to optimize it for jobs, to optimize it for employment. And the benefits are clear. Whether it is government, they have benefits. Whether it is the private sector, individual citizens. The benefits to government is through the ecosystem-based adaptation for food security assembly. What government will benefit is that through this assembly, it provides a solution space whereby they can be able to leverage not only ecosystems for food security, but at the same time, also have the opportunity to partner with the private sector, to partner with academia, and ensure that this not only become an engine for investment, but at the same time also an engine for job creation for the youth in the continent. The private sector. The private sector creates jobs, but the private sector also needs enabling environment and sometimes incentives to create those jobs. But the private sector through this assembly will not only have the opportunity to have the links to government partnership, but will also link to other businesses and link to other consumers, as well as even the producers, and all these helping to also provide an opportunity for research that can benefit the private sector. To NGOs, civil societies and commodity-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and others. This assembly provides an opportunity not only for you to deliver your mandate in a broader scale, but at the same time facilitates the opportunity to learn from one another and interact with others, as well as build capacity for others across the country. To the educational and research institution, this provides an opportunity to be able not only to disseminate your research, but also to help understand the barriers that are preventing the uptake of EBA for security and others. To understand, why the value chain is not being optimized, and at the same time also provides an opportunity for the institutions to inform policy so that they can be able to also inform those who actually put the policies in place, as well as the laws in place, to students, youth, and individuals. This provides an opportunity, especially to you, not only to benefit, but also to have the opportunity to partner with those across the continent. An idea in Senegal is just as good as an idea in Kenya. But sometimes a good idea in Kenya could actually transform a life in Cameroon. Just as a good idea in Cameroon could transform a life in Botswana, in Zambia, in Chad, in Tanzania. So this is an opportunity. But all these benefits that accrue, I started off by saying the adoption of Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, excellent. How are we going to implement this? The ecosystem-based adaptation for food security provides an opportunity to bring everyone together to deliver on Goal 2, which is to end hunger, ensure enhanced food security and better nutrition, as well as sustainable agriculture, and Goal 8, which is to create good jobs, as well as Goal 13, to ensure that dangerous climate change is prevented, and Goal 17, to foster partnerships. But The most important aspect is also to tap into the middle class, which I mentioned earlier. Facilitating not only the growth of the value-adding enterprises and creating jobs, but at the same time connecting those who don't have the opportunity to innovators, to the private sectors, and even to markets. But for all this to happen, there are two levels, the strategic and the operational level. The strategic level provides the opportunity to link policymakers to other policymakers, to link those in agricultural ministry to those in the environment ministry, and to those in the industrialization ministry, because industrialization ministry must also provide incentives, as well as the finance ministry provide budgetary allocation so that the agricultural ministry can work with the environment ministry, and the industrialization ministry can provide the environment for the private sector to optimize the entire agro-value chain. Linking policymakers to policymakers, as I've said, whether it is linking policymakers to ongoing farm initiatives. This will not only facilitate the opportunity to understand what works, to have informed policy, but at the same time, it will also help inform how enterprises could benefit. Linking policymakers with researchers and academics so that the research ideas and the policy generated could really help inform the policy the policymakers make. Then the operational. This is where the optimization of the value chain sits. The known policymakers, the food producers, the growers need to be linked to markets. They need to be linked to supply markets. They need to be linked to demand markets. There need to be cross-hybridization of knowledge across the continent. There need to be access to technology that is happening in most places. For example, like the Zai technique in Burkina Faso, which has helped not only to increase crop yields by 500%, but this is a semi-arid area that could potentially be applicable to the Turkana area in Kenya. So this assembly provides that opportunity. So whether it's linking registered farmers to registered value-added service providers, like innovative solar dryers for preservation, or it is linking registered farmers to registered processing markets, whether it's food processing industries, flour processing, brewing industries, or it is linking both on farmer producers as well as linking them to value addition enterprises. Linking registered farmers to registered extension so that they can be able to package the produce and get this to markets. Linking registered farmers to registered markets for fresh produce, whether it's supermarkets. All this put together is what this assembly is set to do. It involves everybody and it provides an opportunity not only as a solution space but also as ideas incubation of ideas to create jobs. But it's a vehicle to upscale success stories across the continent. As I end, let me give you a story of Sylvia Banda. Sylvia is an entrepreneur in Zambia. She started her entrepreneurial journey in 1986. And actually what motivated her is Zambia has a population of about 14.5 million. And people, most of the people, just like in any other country across the continent, about 60 or 70% live in rural areas. And 80% of the food produced is produced by women. And most of the time the food they produce get wasted because they don't have the opportunities or the technical skill to be able to process. They don't have access to good storage, to good technology, and they don't have the knowledge to package even what they produce. So what Sylvia did was she was frustrated with the situation in her country. And more so, also frustrated to see that most of the people didn't want to eat the food that was locally produced. They prefer imported food. But knowing that the imported food is less nutritional, Sylvia indicated she will not see this and just sit. she decided to empower local farmers by setting up what is called the cereal food system. This has helped to train smallholder farmers across the country, and she has also helped to ensure that the challenges that smallholder farmers face, access to market, inadequate access to transportation. She established a pay system whereby those who don't have the opportunity to take their produce to market, the pay system actually delivers. As we speak today, Syria has empowered women and have provided training to more than 25,000 across the continent, especially in Zambia, Mozambique, and Tanzania, and 95% of them are women. She is an excellent example that demonstrates the transformational potential that can actually be tapped into. She represents what many across the continent, what many in Kenya, what many in Nigeria, what many in Ivory Coast, what many in Cameroon, what many all across the continent they are doing, but we don't know. But the ecosystem-based adaptation of food security presents an opportunity to bring these trailblazers across the continent to one platform, to get her skill, to get you learn from her, and learn from others like her across the continent. As I conclude, the past 30 years have been phenomenal. And we know that Africa is going to converge at some point. But this is not pre-ordained. It will take more than declarations of good intent. It will take more than policy papers. They are important, but they are just as good as if they are implemented. But what is needed is a transformational approach that utilizes and tap into the energy that is within all of us, into the passion, to be able to ensure that we use that energy to innovate. We use the energy to upscale what is working in the continent. We use the energy to tap into the agro value chain that is worth $1 trillion US. If we are able to do all this, and if we can be able to rise to the occasion, humbled by these challenges, but excited by the opportunities, and rise to the occasion not only to take the opportunities to ensure the collective benefit for each and every African, we can be able to do this if we set our foot ahead. So if we can summon the best in us, if we can be able to say we will tap into this, then we will not only move forward, but we will ensure that Africa will never experience the fear of want. So let us move forward in the spirit of Harambee as a continent and as people with a common vision. And if we do this, I can promise you that the 21st century will be Africa's honor. But let's work together. Thank you.